Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining. We have a very exciting webinar today as part of our CPO series. So we'll go ahead and just give everyone a couple minutes to get settled in and start shortly here. But for those that are here, go ahead and say hello. Let us know your name and where you're joining from in the chat. As for me, I'm Christina from our marketing team here at Dragonboat, joining from Austin, Texas. So hello, everybody. And we have our guest speaker here with us today, Lisa Schneider.
Hi, everyone.
All right, we see someone joining from San Diego. Hello to Kristen. All right, we've got some folks joining from LA, Illinois, from Portugal, all over the world. And Canada, very cool. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to kick off with a few housekeeping notes first. So we will have time for a live Q&A at the end, but please do feel free to submit your comments and questions in the chat as we go. And also this presentation will be recorded, so you'll be able to access all of our on-demand and upcoming webinars at dragonboat.io/webinars. And then my helper Anna here is going to be dropping links in the chat as I mentioned some resources throughout. So thank you to Anna. But we do have a great session today as part of Dragonboat's CPO series, which is a webinar series featuring leading outcome-oriented chief product officers and product leaders, covering topics from scaling product to building effective teams to working with your board and everything in between. So I do want to take a brief moment right now to officially announce our exciting new partnership with the esteemed organization Women in Product, the champion in advancing the careers of women and non-binary individuals. So we are super excited to kick off this first joint webinar and alliance with Women in Product to help shape the future of product innovation and development. So to learn more about Women in Product, go ahead and check out womenpm.org. All right, and before I introduce today's guest, a quick word on Dragonboat. Dragonboat is the secret weapon for business leaders who want to make smarter decisions about their product portfolio and stay focused on reaching their goals. Market-leading companies use Dragonboat to keep their teams rowing in sync. So check out dragonboat.io/CPO to learn more. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Lisa Schneider. So Lisa is an award-winning CPO, frequent speaker, and podcast guest on product strategy and leadership. She's used a combination of product innovation and cross-functional strategy to drive decisive business results across a range of categories, from established companies like Merriam-Webster to startups, from social enterprise to fintech. So Lisa is also a Webby Award winner and executive judge, accelerator mentor, and startup advisor. She is currently a fractional CPO helping companies align product strategy and execution with growth strategy to help startups scale and enterprises accelerate innovation and growth. So it is an honor to have you here with us today, Lisa.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And that does bring us to today's topic, where we will hear and learn from Lisa's experiences and advice on the power of alignment to connect strategy, execution, and outcomes. So this is an especially hot topic given the need to compete effectively and maximize your product investment returns in the current market and environment today. So I'll now hand this over to you, Lisa, and you can take it from here.
Terrific. Thanks, Christina. Hi, everybody. So happy that you're all here. This is, in fact, a very exciting topic, and these are the things that are near and dear to my heart that you can see me posting about frequently, from strategy to road mapping for outcomes, using responsive product portfolio management, and then we're throwing in a couple of extra tips on managing conflicting goals, because things do crop up, and most importantly, communicating your learnings and reallocation so people understand what you're doing. This is a lot to go over, so let's dive right in. The first thing that we're going to talk about is strategy. So this is what often happens is people have I'm loosely calling it mission, but like a thing they want to do, a topic they want to tackle, a problem they want to solve, and they have a bunch of ideas. I'm calling it tactics, but it could be, products, features, and they're like, great, here's a whole list of ideas. Let's get it on the roadmap, right? When are we going to do a thing? So this often happens because it's human nature, right? Like entrepreneurs, startup founders, people who are really driven, they think, right, they have ideas. And so they're thinking about tactics and solutions. It's how your mind works that you first start thinking. But when we jump in there without getting clear on the problems that we're solving and without spending enough time in the strategy space, it actually ends up wasting a lot of time. So I often ask the question, what could possibly go wrong? So first thing is that it feels quick, but it generally requires you to sort of backtrack. And so there's a happy medium between this idea of like, move fast and break things, right? I can do an experiment, but breaking it so frequently that you're constantly backtracking, right? It's wasteful, it wastes cycles, it frustrates people. And in the end, it's really inefficient. Also, because you don't have a strategic framework, this question of here's a bunch of features, when can we get them on the roadmap, just leads to these very like protracted debates over the features, right? What's good? Why is it good? When should it go here, right? Even if we have a prioritization framework, maybe you don't agree on the ranking because again, we don't have strategy. All of this is because there's no creative constraints, right? So if I say, hey, let's go play a game, right? Like somebody could come up with some ideas for a chess game sitting inside, and someone could come up with something for ice hockey or something for baseball, right? We're on different playing fields. So we need creative constraints to at least get on the same field. And highly related is we don't have focus, right? Let's all be focused in the same direction. It's really hard to identify an MVP if you don't have a strategy, because again, you end up with scope creep and everybody's got their pet products. It's hard to empower your team. So, in management, we talk a lot about how can we empower people to do their best work, to feel like they can take ownership. And if we don't provide that focus, those creative constraints, that strategic framework, then they're all over the place. And we're going to look at a case study where that happened. Then you do the whole thing over again, right? So these same conversations are rehashed. You're inclined to react to the hippo. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this term, right? It's the highest paid person's opinion, but I use it very loosely, right? It could be the executive's opinion, but it could be the person who interrupts the most, the person who is loudest, the person who back channels most effectively, right? But those are all sort of not the best way to make decisions. And if you don't have a framework, right, those voices feel louder. And finally, you're not building for outcomes if you don't have a strategy. So let's jump in to looking at the strategic planning pyramid. This is a really good way to think about all the different elements that you need to plan for in your strategy. The first one is your mission, right? Why? Why are we doing this? And I want to say that I have found that people use mission and vision a little bit interchangeably. I really don't care which word you use. What I care is that you're really clear on the elements and you are clear with your team. So the mission is your why, right? Like, why are we doing this? What is the motivating force of like problem that we're trying to solve? Your mission is not a thing you do. It's not the way you do it. It's not the tasks. It's not what you get your audience to do. It's the why. And the vision is like, what will this look like when we're done? Because I can solve problems in a lot of different ways. Again, we need that focus and creative constraints. We're going in a direction of a vision. So I want to give a couple of examples of why these two are really important and together. So one example is I was working at a social enterprise startup that was highly mission driven. And the mission was to provide information about home buying and the home buying process to help ameliorate information asymmetry, right? Mortgage lenders, banks, they all have a lot of information, a lot of data. If you're buying a house, you probably don't have that. And this is a huge expense. For most people, this is the largest investment they'll ever make. It can be a great way to generate intergenerational wealth. And so making a mistake is really bad. So there was a lot of social equity in this and targeting of, first generation home buyers. Clear mission, people were really aligned with the mission. That was not a problem, but there was no vision. So there were 3 different departments that were envisioning this going in 3 different directions. Now, there was nothing wrong with any of these visions, right? These are smart people. They were dedicated. They were really good at their jobs. They may have even had some vertical success within their department, but as an organization, we were not driving outcomes or success because the departments weren't aligned. So again, remember, as a product leader, you are also part of the sort of business strategy overall. And what happened was they were not able to really sell any new partnerships or any new business for over a year because they were going in different directions and they were frustrated with each other. And when I came in, we were able to bring them together, find some through lines and say, okay, here's a vision that we're going to sell against and that we're going to build to and that we are going to market and that we are going to onboard. Right within a couple of months, we signed Lemonade Insurance, we signed Rocket Mortgage, right? Really big heavyweight players. So the difference between having a mission and no vision and having them aligned was really substantial. The other example is the opposite. At Merriam-Webster, I was brought in to be a visionary, right? It was a vision-driven new hire. We are going to bring someone in to do digital innovation, right? This is great. But there was sort of no mission to align with that. So the company had been around for so long, it was like, okay, we write dictionary definitions. And again, right, that's a task, that's not a mission. So every time I said, hey, we could do, this thing, we could use machine learning and natural language processing and generate content, it was like, why would we do that? Because there was no mission. So I literally just sort of looked around and said, okay, why is everybody here? Let's write a mission statement. And I wrote a two-part mission statement that was, one, to propagate our irrational love of the English language, and two, to help people understand and use language better so they could better understand and communicate with the world around them. So imagine a bunch of word nerds sitting there going, oh yeah, that mission makes sense. Now we could align the vision with the mission and people said, oh, now I understand why you want to do that. And they were supportive. So although this tends to feel soft and people sort of want to skip it or make it very trite, it's really very critical. And that's why we're spending a lot of time here. The next level is objectives. So now I know why we're doing it, how it ought to look. How will we know if we get there, right? How will we know if we've succeeded? And obviously this is often money, right? Like it all boils down to money and your investors or your shareholders, whatever stage you're in, right? They want their money, but think about, what do your other objectives look like, right? What do growth measures look like? Retention? Are you disrupting a market? Are you changing the balance of something? Are you reaching a certain amount of people? What do your objectives look like? Then once you have all of that, you can start thinking sort of strategy. What are the broad ways that we'll get there? And then you get into, okay, tactics and a roadmap and all of that work that people jump to so quickly. So when you think about this image that we looked at the beginning, essentially what this looks like is the strategic pyramid with all of the middle missing, right? So it's that messy middle that is missing. It's tactics without context, and that's never helpful. And I mentioned cross-functional collaboration. I also want to point out that here, when you talk about objectives and strategy, it is also really critical to be aligned across the organization. So I'm not here as a product leader telling you, hey, this is a thing that we as product people, this is an exercise that we should be doing on our own. It's really important to be aligned across the organization and especially with marketing. So again, a couple of quick examples. One, and this case study has to be super blind, but there was a health tech company and the product team made a thing. That's all I can say, but like they made a thing and they did all of this work that we're talking about on their own and they made a thing and they sort of tossed the ball over the net to the marketing department. And you'll know about healthcare. Healthcare is a highly regulated industry. And so marketing was like, we can't talk about this. Like we literally cannot promote this. So product did all this work and marketing could not talk about it. If they had aligned early on, as they were going through that strategic pyramid, marketing could have said, hey, this is really cool. We can't talk about it, right? Where's the middle, right? What other features can we bake in that we can talk about so we can get people in there? But they didn't do that. Another example is Honeywell versus Nest. So Honeywell, an insider at Honeywell shared this story with me. Honeywell had the first, what they called interconnected thermostat. They were first to market with a smart thermostat. So that was, super cool early on in Internet of Things. It was a good product and product made this really cool new product, but they didn't align with marketing. So it just went over into marketing as like, here's another product, goes through our normal HVAC, marketing channels, just another product, no big deal. Nest apparently at the beginning did not have a very good product. And in fact, as a thermostat, it was so wobbly that they had to do a little bit of a dark pattern, which I'm not a fan of, that the front of the thermostat, instead of reading the temperature of the room, it read the temperature that had been set to, because the temperature of the room would change so often, right? It was a subpar product, at least to start off with, but their marketing and sort of product positioning were aligned, right? Internet of Things, cutting edge, early adopters. And so Nest won that because sort of their product and marketing vision and strategy were aligned. So it's really important to have cross-functional alignment when you do these exercises. So let's talk a little bit more about, when you're thinking about your strategy, what are some things that you want to consider? So one is sort of doing the right discovery, right? Discovery isn't just, let me talk to users and find out. Discovery is like what's going on in the market. So what's changed in the market or in customer behavior? What are leading indicators that you can see in your data? So maybe you're starting to see little changes in behavior that you can track to something that's going on in the market that really would impact your strategy. And finally, are you sort of in a position of explore or exploit, right? So explore is, hey, we have some ideas that we're checking out, right? We're exploring if this is going to work. And exploit is, hey, we see a little bit of traction here. We want to double down and figure out how to optimize the heck out of this thing. So it can be very important to understand which stage you're in for the strategy that you're working on. The next thing you want to consider is timelines. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat in to say, like, how much time do we have? Because there is a difference if you're in a turnaround, right? You've really got to change something in your organization, or a realignment. Realignment is just things are going well and we need them to keep going well. And in fact, we need to figure out how to make them better versus growth pressure, right? We maybe just got some new investment and investors want to see very quick results. There's growth pressure. So in a turnaround, right, you have less time. So you need to be like super focused, be aware that you have shorter timelines, and frankly, be a little bit more like prescriptive in your leadership, right? You don't have as much time to tell your team like, hey, here's some direction, go figure it out. You might have to say, hey, do a thing. If you have realignment, right, then you have more leeway, there's room to balance, and there's more time for that servant leadership, right? So your strategy can be a little bit less prescriptive and you can give your team more room. And, in growth pressure, there's the risk of actually, we just got money. I mean, I've seen this, right? They overspend, they overbuild, they hire a ton of people sort of before they have learnings or before they know where they should be putting their efforts in. And so that's not a good thing either. Finally, I just want to mention, like, whichever sort of stage you're in, we're all kind of in this time of uncertainty or austerity. So that just lends itself to shorter timeframes overall, right? And thinking more like this year, 6 to 12 months versus long term, because, it's wonky, we're nervous, we want to focus on the now and things will change. But having said that, you always have to balance short-term and innovation. So this quote from The Hard Thing About Hard Things, I really like, that it's quite possible for an executive to hit her goal for the quarter by ignoring the future, and you don't want to be in that stage. So obviously there's sort of a lot more to strategy. The last thing that I'm going to mention is this idea of the GEM model. It's a nice acronym, right? One is growth, that could be right, growth, could be acquisition. One is engagement, which could be also retention or usage, and monetization. You want to be thinking about all three facets of your business. And if you're making a decision to focus on, one or two of these and not the other one or two, then make sure that that's a deliberate decision and that you're really thinking about all three of these areas and how you're balancing your resources. Finally, strategy without tactics or tactics without strategy, both are routes to failure. So make sure that you have a good combination of strategy and tactics. All right, so here's a quick summary. Y'all can read. I'm not going to read it. Let's jump ahead and start talking about roadmaps. So the most important thing, and this is really a change from what a lot of people imagine and automatically think of when they think of a roadmap, is to roadmap outcomes and not features. And I was telling Christine, I literally had a conversation last week with a client that I advise for. They had a board meeting coming up and they actually didn't really have a roadmap ready. And I was talking about, okay, let's talk about putting outcomes, goals on the roadmap, and let's not have a thing that's like a list of features, in April, we're going to build this. And all the CEO and founder heard was like, we're not going to have a list of features by time. And he said, no, like, we have to have a roadmap. The board expects a roadmap. You can absolutely have a roadmap that is outcome-based. So outcomes are things like our goals, right? We're going to increase conversion 27%. We're going to do SMB acquisition, right? What are your goals? That goes on the roadmap, right? I commit to reaching a goal by a certain time. Then you stack your hypotheses or your feature ideas underneath that. And it does a couple of things. First of all, it ties those to the outcomes that you're trying to get, but also it kind of like subliminates them beneath the outcome. So instead of, I'm going to build, package add-on in December, it's like, I'm going to increase usage, and maybe it's a package add-on, or maybe it's a new tier, right? It doesn't matter, because the point is the goal, and it gives you more room to test and learn and have learning-led growth. Another little trick is to maybe use color coding, right? If you do need to present a longer term roadmap, you can sort of fade your color over time to indicate increased uncertainty. So again, this is like almost a visual trick to align people with the idea that future things are unknown. I also like sometimes using vertical bars to indicate dependencies, right? The outcome of this experiment is going to be highly binary, so here's where a decision will be made. Or we're expecting that customer success is going to onboard 5 new people by this time in order to accommodate the growth that we have planned. So if they don't do that, right, we need as an organization to reconsider. But anything that, again, gives your other stakeholders, and particularly the rest of the C-suite and the board, some sense of, right, things fade over time, there are dependencies, we're going after goals, the ways we get it might change. And speaking of them, right, get alignment and get ahead of this narrative. So if you're going to present something that's totally new, or you're going to present a dependency, right, you don't want to come in there and just shock people, or you don't want your counterpart who's part of that dependency to be surprised. So make sure that you're talking to people and saying, hey, here's what I'm thinking, here's what we're working on, here's an idea of what something might look like. Pregame that a little bit. The other thing I recommend is to sort of focus on proxy metrics or leading indicators. And what I mean by that is, like, what's the thing that we can figure out earlier that will tell us if we're on track for our goal, right? Or test to see if it gets us on track for our goal. So example, if your goal is to increase retention rate, you might look and say, like, what things do the people that have high retention do? And how can I get more users to do those things? So if, for example, people who sign up for our newsletter have higher retention, that might be a thing that we focus on. How do we get people to sign up, open rates, right, keep them engaged? Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's people who do these 3 things on the platform, or do it 3 times within 2 weeks of signing up, tend to stay longer. So how do we get them to do those things? So think about what happens sort of before the thing that you're trying to measure. Get that into the hypotheses on your roadmap. All right, so kind of roadmap for outcomes, so that you're aligning efforts with goals and not being attached to features being built at a particular time. Now we get into the fun part, prioritization and responsive product portfolio management, which is acronymed here because it's really long. So the first thing I want to talk about is prioritization frameworks. And I actually have this idea of using different frameworks at different stages. And the first stage is this sort of triage that you might do when a ton of people come at you with feature ideas. And you want to use this sort of simple value versus effort to get to maybe or no. So that could look like, and again, right, there's variations on this theme. This is more about the idea of using a slightly simplified thing like, value and complexity to get to priority, right? Using that to just kind of like get to maybe or no. There are a lot of reasons why this isn't a great framework for outcome-based consideration. One, because impact tends to really be money rather than some of your goals that might lead to money, but are really, again, important proxy indicators, right? So things like retention. The other is that you could have goals that are not met because in this scoring, they'd sort of come in underneath, right? So let's say we draw a line here, we're going to do anything that's a whole number, and these fractions aren't done. But if these fractions are all something that are part of a goal, all of a sudden we're not doing anything to meet that particular goal. So why do I recommend this? I recommend this because last year I was working with a MarTech company, And because the work that they did in their space was so data detail oriented, they dug into data so deeply, they analyzed it so deeply, their work was like really incredible. But they were doing the same thing to analyze every single suggestion that came their way from anywhere in the company, even if they knew that it probably, wasn't helpful, wouldn't meet their goals, wouldn't help enough people, but they would do all of this work. And so they were spending way too much time and way too much resources on this work rather than doing the work on the things that would matter. So this can help you just kind of identify what matters, but in a way that still has a sense of objectivity to it. So the real framework that I like and recommend is metrics over available resources. And the reason is because that does align efforts with your strategic goals and the outcome-based roadmap that we talked about. And it accounts for goals other than monetization. And it enables you to kind of allocate resources because you're looking at either goals or departments or segments, right? You can sort of look at these separately. So what does that look like? We talked about an example goal of conversion boosting features. So let's say, okay, I've got 3 suggestions for conversion boosting features. So I think feature A, my hypothesis is this will contribute to 40% of our goal, right? I estimate the lift will meet 40% of our total goal. So this is the contribution to the total goal that you have. Now, your hypothesis might or might not be right, but you work with the best information you have at the time. And this is the resources required. So you just divide it out and you get your score. So you can see if someone makes a suggestion, it's like, there's no way that's going to work. So that's a 0. So a couple of things here. One is that your total here, okay, I'm going to like maybe meet 60% of my goal. Either that has to be in a short enough time frame that I can figure out how I'll meet the other 40%, or I need some other hypotheses, right? So already you're thinking about outcomes and completely meeting your goal. The next thing is you can start to divvy up your resources. And the framework that I like for that, for this sort of resource allocation, is something that I call the capacity roadmap, right? It's just a short-term visualization tool. It shouldn't be too far out, right? You should not have an 18th month capacity roadmap, ideally. But this is what it looks like. So let's kind of go through the top here. One is, I use this term run the engine. People use care and feeding or keep the lights on, but there's always something that's here. 20, like 25% is a super common number. It's ideal to put it in here, right? It's another mistake I've seen people make is they're so excited about like new products, new build and innovation. They don't really have any room for maintenance. And then they wonder why that's all so frustrating. So build that in. The next is, again, let's say we have these different goals and we say, okay, I'm going to put some percent of my resources against this one, some percent against that one. Realize, again, this depends on the size of your team and how you're breaking up your teams and how you're using this roadmap for either small teams or multiple teams. But you don't want, 10 things with 5% here because you'll never get anything done. But you can also show that, hey, right, we're pretty full up. If we put a reasonable effort against this, we're pretty full up. We can't start this until the end of the quarter, right? And then we talked about innovation and planning ahead. So you may want to have something in there. And again, these are super fake numbers. I don't care if it's 5%, 25%, super fake numbers, and say, hey, in quarter 1, we're going to learn something, and now we're going to pick it up. The last thing I want to point out here is that these totals are 90%. That is deliberate. You want some slack in your time budget because something will always go wrong. Something will happen. There will be an emergency. There will be a client thing. There will be an outage. Something always goes wrong. And the teams that plan for that sort of plan at 90% and have slack, do much better. So what you've got is sort of this percent of what you're working on. And you can sort of go here and say, okay, these are the resources that we need. Now you combine these, right, to get to where you need to go. Now you're set up for responsive product portfolio management. So that looks like this double diamond with lots of cycles in between. And you can start to see why it was important that we spent so much time on strategy and road mapping, because that sets you up for success in doing this, right? So you have your strategic cycle, you have your strategy, and that's going to happen, right? You're going to get new market inputs and you're going to say, hey, has anything changed here? All of the discovery work that we talked about, will go into your strategic cycle and be revisited on occasion. But then you have your strategic cycle and your execution cycle. And this is sort of where that learning-led growth, that magic happens of saying, okay, this part doesn't change as frequently, right? We have our same objectives. What we have here is learning-led growth, right? We have experiments that we're doing. We have ideas of how we're going to meet those objectives. And every time we learn, we do a little bit of adjustment in here to reallocate to make sure that we're meeting our goals. And as things go to market, right, this align and allocate and adjust is actually true in here, as well as going around to here. So when you have the right foundations in terms of strategy and outcome-based roadmaps, you're set up for success to do that learning-led growth in between. And what it looks like for teams is sort of like this cascade down with, again, discussions in between. So very similar, but thinking about, all right, you know, annually we have our objectives, but making sure those are objectives, right? Like the executives at sort of the annual objective setting should not be talking about projects and features. And if they are, they should be placed in that roadmap right underneath the goals. And as you learn, you sort of organize in between each section, right? So you're organizing in between, okay, as we learn, we might change the projects that we're working on. As we learn, we understand if these are the right initiatives, if we're able to meet them, if something has changed and we need to do something else. And eventually that rolls up to, you know, geez, have things changed enough that we need to change our objectives, right? But you have all of that learning here between these cycles and between these levels of management. So that all sounds great. What happens when you have conflicting goals? So conflicting goals are sadly not uncommon and can really throw a wrench in the works. So there's two categories of conflicting goals. One are when your product team or teams have conflicting goals. And these are things that often tend to be, and again, right, your mileage may vary, but often tend to be in inverse relationships, right? So if bringing something up is going to bring the other thing down, you can't ask me to bring them both up because it's not going to work, right? And so that's one frustration. The other is cross-functional, right? You want me to increase acquisition, but we're going to cut customer service, right? So these people are not going to be supported, and then we're not going to be successful, and that's going to come back to me, right? Build one thing and market another. We looked at a bunch of examples like that, right? You might spend 50% of time on this, that, and the other thing, which, adds up to more than 100% of your time, which is not possible. And that can happen when you have, again, as product being a very central function, when you have different departments coming and saying, I need this, I need that. And all of a sudden there are too many things to do, right? And it's this like, can't you just get it done? So how do we handle this? My first tip, and this is primarily for the things that are sort of conflicting goals within product, is segmentation. And you can do this, it's new versus existing users, segment by source, ideal customer profile. But the idea is that if I have to do this, then in the example I gave, right, maybe if I bring in a bunch of people from search, there's a lot of like random people in there that may or may not be committed. So my engagement will go down. Then I'm going to segment out, right? New people who came from search are going to be in one bucket. And, existing customers or people who came for the second time forward are going to be in another bucket. When you make those buckets for this type of segmentation in particular, this MEIS framework is like a consulting thing, and it stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. And basically what that means is that you don't want to have overlap, right? You don't want to have overlap, and you want to account for everybody at the same time, and you don't want to slice and dice so tiny because it's just too small to work with. You can look it up and investigate it further. So that's, segmentation is a great way to address conflicting goals within the product. Bracketing is a really good way to address conflicting goals between departments, right? And that's more about limiting the goals on either end to bring them closer together. So again, kind of using the same example, we'll only onboard X new clients for every customer service hire. So you want to work together. And the last tip is communication. Make the person or team with the opposite goal your new BFF. And by the way, I do not mean this in any kind of fake way, right? This needs to be authentic, but think about first team principles, right? How do I how do I make sure that the counterparts I consider part of my team and not just my vertical. So an example is when I was at Merriam-Webster, I had the editorial department reporting to me. So essentially most of the company reported to me because they wanted this sort of like digital product strategy to be the leading strategy for the company. So editorial reported to me, and I had editorial in my capacity roadmap assigned for, let's say, these 3 projects, and so their time is full. And there's a global salesperson who thinks like, great, if we just like make more books, because we still had a print program that was profitable, right? If I get more books to sell, I can sell more stuff. So all of a sudden he's like, hey, let's make 6 new books. And I'm like, hey, we're slated to make 3 new books, and I don't have the resources for that, right? He and I had conflicting goals. And instead of fighting with each other, and instead of like, backstabbing and going to the CFO or going to the CEO, right, we use first team principles and we work together to come up with business cases and figure out together, and then go back to the CFO and talk as a team about what was reasonable. So the outcome was good instead of being really frustrating. And speaking of communicating, right, the last thing is make sure that you are communicating all of this great work that you're doing. So you're doing work to be outcome driven, to be building to objectives, and making sure that you are learning and reallocating through responsive product portfolio management as you go, so that you're not just saying, oh, we committed to build a feature, right? Something's be PO'd if I don't build that exact feature. So make sure that your communication is structured so people know what to expect, right? Share your work. This was our plan. This is what we learned. This is what it means. This is how we're acting on it. This is what the new plan looks like, right? Don't just say, trust me, this is the new plan. Share your work in a really structured way that shows people, and use storytelling to really make that come alive. So sort of control the narrative, right, with great data viz. Because again, if people aren't used to this, right, like the guy that was like, what do you mean we won't have features on a timeline? I need a roadmap, right? If people aren't used to this, control the narrative with great data viz, right? How can you show really visually and quickly what you learned, right? Great storytelling, give them context and make an arc. Share context, right? About, how you did all of this and what you learned and where you were surprised. And again, like we said previously, kind of pregame, right? With stakeholders, because nobody likes surprises. So this is a super corny meme. This is from like 2016. It's from the Olympics, and the gymnast Michaela Moroni was constantly being caught sort of making this face. And the meme was, Michaela Moroni is not impressed. So you do not want to do all of this incredible work to do outcome-oriented product management and then have people just feel surprised and taken aback and make that, Michaela Moroni is not impressed face. Share early, share often, and really give people context to what you're doing. So here's a summary of what we went over. It was a lot. This stuff is simple, but not easy. And if you have questions that we can't get to here, or you need help, please feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat and brainstorm. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa, for so many amazing insights and learnings. We are coming up on time soon, and we want to take a few questions that we have from the audience. But before we move to Q&A, I'll do a quick conclusion here. So through partnering with thousands of product leaders like Lisa, we've learned they do need the right tooling for their teams to achieve their goals. So you can check out how DragonBoat can help your product teams by booking a free consultative demo at dragonboat.io/CPO. And then some more resources for you. So Lisa partners with founders and CEOs to deliver product strategy and execution that unlocks roadblocks, extends your runway, aligns your team, and drives scale. So for any fractional CPO, product consulting, or coaching needs, please do reach out and connect. Continue the conversation with Lisa on LinkedIn. And you can also check out dragonboat.io for all other upcoming and on-demand webinars, get access to additional resources in our blog. If you're interested in the framework for responsive product portfolio management, what Lisa was mentioning earlier, you can actually get a free certification at responsiveppm.org. And last but not least, please do check out our partner womenpm.org to join their community or learn about their upcoming events and resources. Okay, and now we will take some questions for the audience. So we're going to do a little rapid fire here in the last 5 minutes. I see a couple questions came through. So Lisa, if you're ready, we can kind of kick this off.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the first question is, what strategies or approaches can leaders adopt to optimize productivity and efficiency when those resources are limited?
So I think that comes back to your strategy and back to the idea of focus, right? So realizing that you cannot do everything. And I will say this like, oh, okay, times are tough. We're going to do more with less. Like, no, that's a disaster. We're not going to do more with less. We're going to be really smart about what we're doing. So again, that's why outcomes are so important. And that is why that sort of strategic, like almost consulting type analysis frameworks are so important. What is the one thing that if we did would move the needle the most, and focus on that and think about your resources and your outcomes? How much, again, right? Like it doesn't pay to have a couple of people doing 5 different things. You won't make any traction. So it is about that prioritization and outcome combined and being really focused in what you're doing.
I love that. I feel like we've been hearing do more with less a lot, but
Oh my
I like
God,
that you
stop.
said just be smart about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So how do you recommend identifying the right success metrics to prioritize and plan around to achieve better business results?
Oh my God. You know, I was just saying with Christina, like there's a lot of like follow-up seminars that we need on this. You know, I actually recommend looking up, there are a lot of like consulting frameworks. So if you think about yourself as a business consultant and look up consulting frameworks, like we don't have time to dig in, but there are really things where you look at like examine your profitability structure, right? Where can that be improved? Examine the competition, examine your customers, right? There are so many frameworks that you can use for that. I would look them up, or again, you know, feel free to reach out to me, but you really want to think like a business consultant at that early strategy part.
Awesome. And then we have 2 questions around tooling. So someone asked, what is your favorite software tool to manage product portfolio from strategy to execution? And if any of them include prioritization tools, and the others along the same lines, what tools can you use to connect strategy and execution?
Yes. So I feel like I'm sort of being handed a softball here. So I will say, but this is like an honest assessment, is Dragon Boat, right? The reason I'm here with Dragon Boat is because we're aligned in this idea of an outcome-driven practice. And Dragon Boat is great because it has built in a bunch of different prioritization tools. It doesn't just force you into metrics over available results, although it has that too. And as I told my client last week, one of the benefits too is that the dashboards end up creating artifacts that you can lift and shift into your presentation. So when we talk about either giving a presentation or having to do something for the board, right, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You've got everything that you need right there in a way that is really visually effective. So I like it for that as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. And the next question here, what do you do if you're added to a project mid-flight and see there's no alignment, vision, mission, and teams are working in silos?
Oh my God, been there, done that. Look, it depends on the organization. I think, right, you have to point it out. The question is how and to whom, right? So where do you see, right, how attached are people to those outcomes? You know, I had that at Framework where we had 3 people, 3 departments that were doing sort of 3 different things, and there was a lot of sensitivity, right? They came out of nonprofit, so people were very attached. And I think it's really like, this is almost the opposite of the high level strategy. It's like, what's the smallest thing I can fix, right? Who can I talk to get an ally, right? You're not going to change that whole thing overnight, right? You're brought into something in the middle. It's like the worst. I'd rather start 7 projects than be brought into something in the middle. So where can you start and really kind of measure your frustration out over time, so that you are almost doing responsive product portfolio management and incremental learning-led growth to solving this problem by thinking like, what's one small thing I can change? What's one ally I can get? And once people start seeing changes, then you can snowball, right? They will come around when they see the effects, but you cannot change their mind overnight.
Awesome, Lisa. And we've got time for one more question here. So I think it's related to what you mentioned earlier about the hippo, but someone asked, what advice do you have for challenging the highest paid person's opinion, especially when it defies future focused planning and strategization?
Again, probably a really complicated answer, but look, right? Anything you can do to keep the conversation objective and data focused is great. So it's so hard, right? You feel attacked, you know better. And, speaking as a woman, and we're partnering with women in product, right? Especially if maybe the hippo's a man and you're a woman, right? There's a lot of dynamics there. But honestly, the more you can take the emotion out of it, the better. The more you can use data, the better. And, these frameworks are great tools, but think about how do you adjust them in nuanced ways for the situation that you're in. So if somebody insists on seeing the projects in order, how do you put the goals underneath and then do data reporting to start to, again, slowly and incrementally bring them along? I think it's really hard when we want to do good work and from a good place, we think we have good frameworks and good answers, and then people aren't aligned. And so you're really frustrated. I think pulling back on that, and again, figuring out how do you take the emotion out of it and how do you move them incrementally along, right? It might not happen this quarter. It might take you the year.
Okay, perfect, Lisa. Thank you for that quick little rapid fire and for all the audience great questions. That is all the time that we have for today. So again, such an incredible discussion, Lisa. Thanks again for joining our CPO series, and also to our partner, Women in Product, for partnering with us on this event. So thank you, everybody, again, and hope you take care and have a nice rest of your day or evening, and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.